We've been talking about app modernization. App modernization is about the transformation of, as we've discussed, a legacy app to a more modern app. That transformation can take several different streams or focuses. One, of course, is on the app itself and the technologies on which that app is hosted. The other, of course, is related to process and culture. We haven't dealt with too much of that in the series this month, but just know that, of course, if you're going to modernize your application and your processes are outdated or inflexible or insecure, your application itself stands very little chance of actually becoming modernized. So we are performing or we are giving a webinar, a town hall this week, actually on Tuesday. If you want to check out our website, you could see that. We will deal with these sorts of issues and more particularly one of the platforms that enables app modernization this week. Now, to today's topic, which is actually somewhat on point with that webinar, is Azure or Microsoft's cloud and the way that it enables app modernization. Now, we're not going to go into the details today, both because this is a part of the What Is series, and I really just want to pepper you with some terms you can look up and dig into. But in the very least, this week is focused on a bit more practical application of app modernization within the context of specific vendor solutions. So you'll hear me mention a lot this week, products. I don't do that a lot in the What Is series on purpose because I'm trying to give you definitions more than I am trying to give you particular examples in the market. But this week we will. I'll deviate from that pattern a bit this week. So today's topic is Azure and app modernization. And we're going to focus it in really two distinct buckets. There are more than just two. There's around 5 different areas that Azure and Microsoft have moved to support app modernization. Things like continuous integration. The Azure DevOps platform is actually a phenomenal place to continue to dig in there. This deals with automation. It deals with developer productivity. It deals with source code management. It deals with release and deployment management, pipelines, and automation. But we're not going to focus on that today. Where we're going to focus today is on Azure App Service, Kubernetes service, and container instance, in part because they offer 3 ways to take an application from a traditionally hosted legacy environment to a more modern environment. Now, this is going to key on several terms we've used in previous What Is series topics this month. So go back and watch container as a service, Kubernetes as a service, and you'll get in platform as a service. These are all terms that hopefully you know what they mean. If you understand them already or you've watched those videos, great. Today we're going to pull on some of those terms or use some of those terms. So Azure App Service is the first one. Azure App Service is classically and most generally platform as a service. Now, its design is meant to make hosting and releasing packaging, hosting, and releasing your application simple. And so, or at least a lot less complex than would have been the case in the past if you were having to deploy a virtual machine and patch and install infrastructure software and then deploy your application on top of it. So it does fall classically into the platform as a service category. What I will also tell you is Azure has, or Microsoft has created kind of a dual paths of entry into app service. Number one is, I'll call it the classic non-container route, which leverages either command line packaging, web-based packaging, integrated development environment packaging to get your application from code into a deployable thing that then can run an Azure App Service. Now, you can imagine in that world, they only support certain languages and environments because it's very coupled in a sense to a particular technology set. Effectively, the burden of packaging is on the Azure team. And so they've only been able to support, I think their vision is to really only support a handful of platforms. Path 2 is by leveraging containers. And so We haven't spent a lot of time in this What If series talking about containers. It's not really meant to be that deep, but what I will say is a container provides a way to package your application and the necessary steps to deploy that application as a single unit. And therefore, the burden of packaging is now on you, the container builder. And when you package a container, it's called a container image. So that container image can be deployed in Azure App Service as well. So that's path number 2. If you package, it's either packaged by Azure and it's not containerized, or it's packaged by you and it is containerized. And in either case, Azure App Service provides a way, a platform as a service way to package your app. Now, option 2 is when it gets highly containerized. So if we're going to pull in another term we've talked about recently, microservices. If you're deploying a microservices app where you've containerized each one of your services and you are going to deploy these microservices in a collection of microservices, these microservices represent probably lots of different containers all running and needing to be deployed and managed. Often that's helped by Kubernetes. So we talked about Kubernetes as a service. Azure has an example of that called Azure Kubernetes Service, aptly named. And in Azure Kubernetes Service, it gives you the ability to host Kubernetes-based workloads, so containerized applications or microservices or whatever it is, can be deployed into Kubernetes. And what Azure is providing you, or Microsoft's providing you through Azure Kubernetes Service, is a simplification to the deployment complexity when it comes to deploying Kubernetes. Kubernetes is not a very simple thing to deploy. And so Azure, and as we'll see later this week, other services provide a turnkey way. And again, this is the definition of Kubernetes as a service, but it provides a simple way to deploy Kubernetes. And that way it gives you the ability to get all the value of Kubernetes, which typically is involved in the management of multiple, often many containerized workloads. The last Azure service we'll touch on really quick is Azure Container Instance. Now, Azure Container Instance and Azure Batch are two that are sort of similar in a way, in that they allow you to run both containerized workloads either on a schedule, which is Azure Batch, or simply persistent with persistence or continuously running, but without some of the trappings of full PaaS platform, or without the necessary complexity of Kubernetes. And so it's kind of an interesting middle road. Now, without going into too much of the details here, Microsoft has created some really interesting integration between ACI, Azure Container Instances, and Azure Kubernetes Service. I won't talk about all those, but if you want to Google or look at Bing search, since that's on topic today, if you want to search the internet for virtual kubelet, Kubelet, or if you just want to search for ACI or Azure Container Instance integration with Azure Kubernetes Service, it's a very neat, unique in the market, honestly, way for this service to come together. But Azure Container Instances, as the name describes, is a way to host a containerized workload quickly. Now, you'll notice I've not touched on function as a service. So Azure Functions, by the way, is a means of hosting code. We talked about function as a service in a past video. So go back and look that up if you don't know what FAS or function as a service is. But Azure Functions is the option there. You've also got kind of an integration platform as a service with Logic Apps, which feeds Azure Logic Apps, which feeds a whole nother ecosystem called Power Platform, which brings in Power Automate, and Power Apps, which is the application platform as a service offering that Microsoft has. So again, the goal today wasn't necessarily to go into all of those. I really wanted to focus around some of the topics that were extensions of previous videos. But in Azure, there are 3 pertinent technologies when it comes to hosting your application, particularly one that's been containerized, and that is App Service, or Azure App Service, Azure Kubernetes Service, and Azure Container Instances.